Thank you, Mr. Byer. Mr. Rowe, would reparations effectively address the wealth gap?
Of, oops, sorry, I'm much more a fan of encouraging entrepreneurship in the Black community because we have a rich history of doing so. But as the others have said, getting access to initial capital is part of the big problem, right? So how do we
I
actually?
accept that. I accept that, but that's not reparations. So if I can, I just have limited time. I don't mean to cut you off. And I don't know quite how it's supposed to be structured, but is there financial literacy pervasive enough in the African American community that could, if given a large lump sum of money, an individual or a family would be able to handle that money wisely? I say that not pejoratively, but just because financial literacy is so important to do so.
Well, I think financial literacy is important for people of all races. It's not just a
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So one of the interesting things that's happening is that there are many new models emerging around how to encourage entrepreneurship, particularly in the Black community.
I'm going to
So,
back you off because I have some questions.
okay.
I will note that financial literacy, I spoke to a man yesterday who's very engaged in creating it within the African American community. But again, folks, particularly who are lower socioeconomic, typically have poor financial literacy. Um, um, so just to point that out, I'm not quite sure. Dr. Hamilton,
School choice can help there too, because
I'm
there are
with you.
great schools that are teaching financial literacy. We, in our own schools,
Hang on, I'm sorry, I'm coming back to you.
okay.
Dr. Hamilton, are you really opposed to school choice?
I'm exposed to diverting resources from establishing a public school system that entitles every American to a high quality
So let
education.
me stop you for a second. So during the pandemic, teachers unions would not allow public schools to open, but private and parochial did, and many charter schools did. Now, should we have kept the resources in the public schools that did not open, or should we have allocated them to the schools that actually opened? Because we know that people in poverty and children of color were particularly impacted by not having in-person experience. So over this last year, should we have just given everything to the public schools that didn't open, or should we have given some to those that did?
So I got two quick responses. One is going back and saying financial literacy is practically useless for families with no finances to manage in the first place. And going back to the question.
I'll come back to that, but if you'd answer the question I asked you, please.
Sure. I think the pandemic posed some nuanced questions that requires a more nuanced answer than a simple yes or no to the question you posed.
I didn't ask yes or no. Should the money have been stayed in a public school system that did not open and did not serve the children of poverty who are disproportionately affected by not having an in-person experience, or should it have flowed to benefit those children even if they're attending a charter, private, or parochial school?
I think in a global pandemic with grave health risks, first and foremost, we need to protect people and make sure they're not at risk of mortality. I'm not. I'm answering it directly.
But it was well established that transmission was not occurring in school settings. And public, private, and parochial, charters, private, and parochial reopened, and there was not in-school transmission. And public schools kept taking it as a dodge. And we had a whole year of life lost for these children who lacked that education. Should the money have been diverted to those schools that were actually open to benefit those children?
The answer is the money should have been directed in a way to make all schools open safely and securely.
So let me stop there. My wife is involved with a public charter school because clearly you don't want to answer that question. And I'm a little bit frustrated because I can tell you those kids have been penalized. They've been penalized and we supposedly are advocating for them. But no, it's more about teachers unions than it is about those children. And let me just say this. My wife is involved with the public charter school for children with dyslexia. We can look at black and brown children. 50% of them do not read on grade level by grade 3. Now, many of them are dyslexic. They're not diagnosed. Should the African-American mamas who choose to send their children to that charter school have the right to send their children to a charter school which addresses their children's dyslexia, or no, should they be stuck in a school which does not address it?
Well, as Representative Peters pointed out, there's no empirical evidence to suggest that charter school outcomes en masse lead to better outcomes than public school outcomes.
But the nice thing is they shut down. That's the other nice thing about them. If they fail, they close. whereas a public failing public failing school remains open. So I'll concede that point, but also point out, but nonetheless, go back to my question. Should the African-American mother have the right to send her child to a school which is open, seeing kids, and which addresses her child's dyslexia, or should she not?
I think the premise of your question limits the choice set of a scarce response that doesn't recognize a more structural approach that we can do to address the problem, which is ensure that every American has access to a quality and talented, gifted curriculum throughout all public schools en masse.
So I guess since public schools are not offering specialized curriculum for dyslexia, the only way to access it would be through a charter school. But I'm not sure I'm going to get you to agree with that. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Thank you.